Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today I'm joined by two special guests, Steve Short and Marc Schlipman. Steve is a retired corporate executive who spent nearly 30 years leading billion-dollar divisions in the travel industry. Marc is a seasoned financial advisor who's been helping clients build and preserve wealth for over 2 decades. Together, they co-authored the book, The Simple Road to Financial Freedom, A Guide to Building Wealth and Independence. The book was born out of their shared passion for improving financial literacy, especially among younger generations. While it's geared toward Gen Z and young professionals, its lessons and strategies apply to anyone who wants greater clarity and confidence with their money. Steve and Marc bring a unique blend of real-world experience, practical advice, and approachable storytelling to the topic of money. I'm excited to dive into their insights. Steve and Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marc.
Thanks for having us on, Marc.
All right, Steve. So after nearly 30 years in the travel industry, what inspired you to turn your attention toward financial literacy and write this book? It's probably a transition that you don't see too often, travel industry to finance?
Yeah, very true. I've always loved sort of financial advising. I almost went into it a long time ago before I started my corporate career, and my kids had graduated from college. I sat down with my oldest after she graduated, and we just went through everything in terms of finances and 401k matches, and I took out an Excel spreadsheet and said, if you keep this up, she had a typical recent college graduate job, and told her, if you keep this up, if everything repeats itself, you'll be a millionaire in about 20 years. And I could tell through that conversation, all of this was foreign to her in terms of not learning anything about this in college. And then my middle child graduated, and I went through the same. She was a marketing and finance, so I thought if anybody got the background, it would probably be her. And she didn't have any of this background, and she was worried because she had roommates that were paying their rent, that were living paycheck to paycheck. And she's like, Dad, they didn't teach us any of this stuff in college. And so I talked to Marc, and I go, you must see this all the time as a financial advisor. And then I sort of corrected myself, and I said, no, you probably don't, because you're not dealing mostly with recent college graduates. You're dealing with more seasoned folks. And he said, I see it all the time. Let's write a book. He had recently retired, and it was like, okay, this seems like a great opportunity.
Marc, from your side, you are a financial advisor, and like Steve said, probably things you either saw or didn't see because maybe you aren't working with people that young. But what motivated you from your side to do this? Because writing a book isn't the easiest thing to do. It's probably fun as you're going through it, but then it gets to the edits and the re-edits, and it probably was a long process to do.
Marc, I was equally amazed on Steve's knowledge of finances. I think he was equally as amazed when I would share with him, not only do the young people not have a great understanding of the financial concepts of even getting started and how investing and having a plan works, but like you yourself, Marc, you work with very high net worth individuals, and I see it with business owners who are phenomenal in their business, and they do a great job, whatever that is, their skill set. But when you really peel the onion back, you realize that their knowledge is very limited. But I do believe there was a gap there because they have such pride in what they've done that for them to humble themselves, to ask the questions they really need to ask, to be more proficient in finances, I saw a gap there. I even said to Steve, you see things through your lens, but your level of knowledge is above and beyond. And that's not a compliment, that's just the reality of it. And so I said, most people don't have the same type of knowledge level as you have, even in their 20s, let alone their 70s or 80s. So I look at the book as, hey, let's educate the young, but sometimes you have to educate the parents, the adults, for they've got the tool to help their kids.
Okay, now that we got the background out, and like I said, that travel to finance was a little surprising. The next thing that surprised me is when I got a copy of the book at Amazon, the foreword is written by Will Ferrell. How did that come about? And I know you guys use humor in your approach. Was that had something to do with it, or like that wasn't something I was expecting to see Will Ferrell write a forward on a finance book?
I'll let Steve do a deep dive on the Will Ferrell. But you're right, though. I think so many times when people hear the words budget and plan, working in your business, working on your business, working on your goals and objectives is just like painful and serious. It is serious, but it doesn't have to be taken so seriously. You can actually have fun with it. So it was a nice tie-in to have Will in there.
Yeah, we tried to keep it, just tagging on to that, as we were writing the book. And before I get to the Will story, you were talking about the process of going through it. Mark and I sat down for 2 to 2.5 hours every Monday for about 2 years. And had two guys that didn't know anything about writing a book and just sort of jumped in and started exchanging notes and, having conversations and taking notes from those conversations, and sort of the book sort of evolved. But one of the things we talked about was just making it simple and making it fun as you go along the journey, because no one's going to read a book, especially the younger generation, if it's just, boring. So Will and I go back to college. Actually, we were pledge brothers together and have remained friends for 35 plus years. And so when we were doing the book, it was something that we had talked about with him, that he and I had talked about. And he's got college age kids as well, and personal finance was something that was important to him and teaching the younger generation. And so I asked if he would do the forward, and he was gracious enough to do it for us.
Nice. Like you mentioned, budgets are boring. Even just the word saying that, on my side, I've changed it to spending plan, but still, I think using a humorous approach, trying to take a light of it, definitely goes a long way, especially if the target is that younger person. A portion of the book's proceeds go to Cancer for College. Maybe can you give a little background on why that's important and why you made that a part of the project as well?
So Cancer for College provides need-based college scholarships to cancer survivors and amputees, and actually medical debt relief as well. It was started by another fraternity brother of mine that is a 3-time cancer survivor and double amputee. So he started it, in a little over 30 years ago. And it was something that he saw firsthand when he was in college and going through treatment. He was able to go back to school. His parents had coverage for him to be able to cover the medical expenses. And he saw firsthand how a lot of folks weren't in that same position. So he started the charity. It started off with just a handful of people donating small amounts. I think the first scholarship given, the first scholarship given was about $500. And it's really blossomed from there. It gave about $1 million a year in scholarships, which is just fantastic, life-changing, especially for some of these kids that are getting into medical fields and becoming doctors and things along those lines. I'm honored to be on the executive committee and actually the golf committee chairman. And so we brought Mark out to a tournament, and he was gracious enough to sponsor it through his business, and saw firsthand kind of the impact. And as we were writing this, we thought, this is a great opportunity to give back from a portion of sales to go to Cancer for College, such a great organization.
Nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. Not only are you dealing with cancer as a child, but a lot of times there's medical bills. Obviously, one of the spouses, parents loses their job. A lot of times the divorce rate goes up. So there's a lot of bad things that happen outside of even the cancer realm. That to see these recipients, it was about $1 million a year, Steve?
Yep.
Yeah, to get these checks, and it's life-changing. Then to have them come back, that was what's impressionable to me at the golf outing, is you have them come back and talk about how it has changed their life and their family forever. And it's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's definitely rewarding when you got that attached to the book. All right, let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. Who's the book geared for? I know we've hinted kind of it's this younger generation, but is it the recent college graduate? Is it someone just starting a family? And then kind of talk a little bit about the framework and how is the book structured? Or is it little lessons, or is each chapter tackling a specific financial topic? Is it trying to build a roadmap of these are the things, in your early years you need to go through, the high-level structure of it?
You bring up an interesting point, Mark. We were speaking to some university students. That's a capstone class that they're featuring our book as the focus of the semester. And a lot of the comments we get from the younger generation, because we believe it's targeted either new to the workforce, recent grads, but a lot of the comments we get, Mark, is, man, I wish I would have had this book 5 years ago, or I wish I would have had this book sooner. So what we believe is the sweet spot, we're finding out that a lot of people wish they would have had the book a little bit earlier in their life. So But ideally, yes. Recent college grads is kind of our niche, but we're finding out that, do we need to take it down even a step lower than that and focus on the younger people that are about ready to enter college? I mean, I remember when I first went to college, I got on campus and they were giving away free credit cards. It was just amazing. I'm like, what is this? I mean, $5,000 just to sign up, and you don't really realize what you're getting yourself into. So I think there's a lot of those things that would have definitely helped me out even when I was going to college when I was 18.
Yeah, just to maybe tag on to that, we've heard loud and clear that, as I mentioned, the background with my kids, that this is not being taught necessarily in college or in high school, really, for that matter. Mark and I are both involved in Junior Achievement that you may be familiar with, which teaches some financial skills up through high school. And so whether it's a recent college graduate, could be a recent high school graduates, maybe going into the trades, it's somebody that's basically entering the workforce, getting a paycheck for the first time, really trying to set them up on the path to financial freedom by just following some simple basic processes that are out there versus just starting off without that foundation and kind of just living paycheck to paycheck because they don't know any other way. They weren't taught anything different. That's really trying to set it up and keep it very simple. And just the book really ages as we all age. So it starts off with the basic budgeting. Well, it starts off actually with the power of positive thinking, because that's one of the things we are really committed to for this book is believing that you can get this done, believing that in maybe a little less than 20 years, you can become a millionaire by following some of the things in the book, having the right mindset. But it starts off with budgeting, and we really focus on what we call the 50-20-30 model, a little different than typically what a lot of folks might have, the 50-30-20. So 50% to needs instead of 30% for wants. We sort of said, let's do the savings, which is the last part, the 20% for savings. Let's move the savings up and do that before you do the things that you want. And so really kind of go through that. And then, other chapters, you're just getting, how to invest some money, brokerage accounts, just stuff that basic teaching of that. And then toward the middle of the book, we have a number of chapters that when life gets more complicated, as we call it. So that might be, maybe you're married, maybe you need to worry about life insurance, you might have kids, you got a mortgage, it's a little bit more complicated. And then late in the game, Mark educated me on a lot of folks that he's working with that maybe didn't learn these things early in life, and now maybe their kids or they're empty nesters and they've got jobs that are paying them well, they're in their high earning years. And so the last few chapters talk a lot about that in terms of inheriting money, things like that. So we really tried to set it up to be able to something that ages like we all age, and hopefully something that people can put it on a bookshelf and be able to pull it out every few years just to sort of refresh their memory as things become more topical at the time.
I was at an event north of Kansas City about a month ago, and this physician, he's about 60, he is 61. He says, "Hey, Mark, I read the book, and my son is getting married, and my daughter's engaged as well. And I read your book, and I came across that topic on, prenups, not necessarily prenups what people typically think of, but a prenuptial agreement on potentially protecting you against debt of the person you're marrying. A lot of college debt, and I believe this future spouse had a college debt around $220,000. And he said, sure enough, I took your principles in your book, talked to my attorney. They did some research, and wow, we were able to implement just that to help protect their daughter going into a marriage in case he's not able to fulfill his requirements and he would pass away. That helps shield them against the debt. So he says, I always thought about prenuptial agreements as being, for the ultra rich, but it's actually quite the contrary.
Sure. Yeah. I saw in my Apple news feed this morning one of the stories and one of the articles, and I don't remember who it was that said it, but they said learning money skills is the most important skill that someone can learn nowadays. I think it's gotten better in schools than it was, 20, 30 years ago, financial literacy, but it's still got a long way to go. The challenge I think I see is the way younger people consume data. They're used to TikTok and they're used to seeing a snippet. One of my whole podcast episode was on a TikTok that someone did about Beyonce and Jay-Z and Roth IRAs and their daughter. Because I actually got questions, should I start a Roth IRA for my kids based off of what they saw on a TikTok? How do you see the best way to get kids, whether they're in college, whether they just graduated, if they're in college, they got all these different books, they're studying, throw one more on them, is it going to get read? Or if they just graduating, they're focusing, okay, I got my job, my career's just starting. Now we're telling you, okay, here's, and I've done this myself. I have clients, their kids go to college, their kids graduate college. I've sent them a book. I don't know if it gets read or not. The other thing is you also mentioned is, Steve, you were saying, Mark, did some of the later chapters on, what happens if you really didn't do some of these principles early on and you kind of do them later? How do you, whether you're empty nesters or how do you do it then? I think that's really challenging too, because, you mentioned the 50-20-30, or versus the 50-30-20, but getting someone who is just used to spending paycheck to paycheck to say, okay, you're going to start having to save 30%. Those habits are ingrained in them to spend. Trying to break them, that's really challenging. So I think what you're trying to do is to start people early is great. It's just, how do you get past the challenge of the way people consume data, younger people consume data now?
That's a great point. And but the one thing that and Steve mentioned about it as well, is that power of thinking and framing what financial freedom looks like for you. So I think once we find out that young people are like, okay, here's my goal. And the goal for most people is not to have, 5 million or 10 million or whatever the millions you're going to be. What is defining what their financial freedom is? And where do you want that? What do you want that financial freedom to look like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now? And let's write it down. These are your goals. And all the decisions in the past are irrelevant. The next best decision is your next choice on how you commit funds, either getting you closer to your goal or moving you away from it. And I believe a lot of people don't focus enough. They just like to hear about savings. Well, what for? What's the purpose? But once you clearly define what you want your life to potentially look like in 5, 10, 15, or even at retirement, and then write it down, like, okay, this is a reason why I am going to work towards saving 20%. And then they realize, hey, it doesn't have to be all my money. Maybe I can save money on unused subscriptions. I've got a 401k match that's going to help me get to that 20%. There's a lot of different things. And then they look at the market potential to get them towards their goals, their financial goals. I truly believe that once a person frames what their goals are and objectives and really write them down as a business plan, then it becomes a little more doable. Like, I didn't realize potentially in 20 years, if I save X amount of dollars, that I can have these financial goals. I didn't know if it's possible. And you're right, though, because we're so consumed. Like, the car doesn't cost $45,000. The car is only $850 a month. And get away from that mindset of being taken advantage of in the media. And what is the next best decision? We talk about delayed gratification, maybe not having so much right now to benefit you down the road. But there are moments, and Steve and I talk about these in the book, they're called the STL moments. Stop, talk, and listen. And there's sometimes we talk about you can do a lot of the stuff to get towards your goals through the book, but there's sometimes you need to bring a professional in and a coach to help you.
That's going to add to that. Yeah, Mark was great in terms of the visualization part, because that is just so hopefully having people take a step back and sort of visualize what that is to get them focused on it. One of the couple things that we talked about in the book was the $1 million mark. And so that seemed to resonate with the younger generation when we were talking to the kids, just because it's obviously a big number that's there. And we go through an example that's very step by step in terms of the 401k match, maybe an HSA match, stock market returns if it repeats itself, which we know it doesn't always do that. But if it's the historical numbers happen, 18, 19, 20 years, you can become a millionaire. And as we point out in the book, 75% of that $1 million is actually not from you. It's just the stock market returns and all the stuff that you guys know better than me. But the younger generation doesn't know that. And that was another eye opener for the younger generation. They're like, wait, I don't need to save $1 million to have $1 million? Hold on. And so some of those things, like, no, you only need to save like a quarter of it. And that's just the power of it. I think one of the main reasons we wrote the book too is most people are writing books because they've got a sale at the end of the book sale, right? They're trying to get new customers or whatever the case may be. So there's not a lot of people that focus on this demographic because we're not trying to sell anything. This is truly a passion project for Mark, and he's not trying to get new, recent college graduates as customers or anything like that. And I don't have a business. So it was really a passion project for us. And so That's the part that is exciting. How do they consume it? Boy, we hope we read the book. I mean, we've heard from plenty of people. We've seen some great reviews that are out there that, paid off $10,000 based on, the things that I learned in your book, which is awesome and very rewarding to see. We're trying to meet them where they are too from a social media standpoint. So we're pretty active in terms of having weekly, roughly, videos that are out there where Mark and I will sit down and go over a topic, maybe a little bit more in depth than what we talk about in the book, and just sort of make it bite-sized, about a minute. Got to fit it in, for Instagram and all that. And so we're trying to, and we've seen that really pick up the number of followers, and then the number of sales kind of go along with that as well, where people are like, wow, I'm learning some good stuff here. Maybe the next step is I should buy the book, and there's probably a little bit more that they go in depth on some of these topics. And we've got an audio book.
Yeah, speaking of the audiobook, well, I'll go back to that, but the universities we've spoken to and listening to basically our demographic, and most of them have been college seniors that we're getting feedback from, unbelievable feedback from them. I mean, very knowledgeable. The stereotypes, I think, need to be debunked. These are some really motivated kids from a cross sector, and the ideas, Mark, that they're coming up for us to get the brand out there is amazing. Things that we never really thought about. I mean, there's some things we are doing, but they're coming from a totally different perspective, and they do seem to gravitate, and we advocate this too. There's a lot of books out there talking about, you should eat ramen your entire life until you become debt free, and no avocado toast, and you can't have a latte. And we're not advocating that. And we're not advocating a lot of different things, but we're saying you can have those things and you can reward yourself, and you're going to feel better about it if you're doing the modeling and getting near that 20% of savings to work towards your goals. And maybe your goals require less than that, or they can be more than that. But once you have your customized plan, then you can reward yourself. And that's where that 30% is powerful. That you don't have to look at a budget as that it's going to be painful. You just got to be disciplined and then run your household like a business. And once I think a lot of people realize, hey, this is my business. Yeah, I work for somebody else, but when that money comes in, that's a receivable that's coming in that we need to work on and maximize every dollar to get towards their goal.
Well, one of the topics you mentioned that I wanted to touch a little bit on is goals. And I wanted to see what some of the feedback you've been getting, or how does the book try and approach it in a little more detail, because I see it as a challenge sometimes. Someone will sit across from me and we'll talk about goals, and they kind of just sit there and have trouble identifying what financial freedom is or what they want to do. How does the book kind of guide someone to setting or identifying what they're really trying to achieve financially?
It's interesting. I have a lot of people that say, Mark, I just don't understand finances. I don't get it, etc. And, consistent behavior. And I think Steve and I come from different backgrounds, two dads, never thought we were authors to write a book. And a lot of people feel the way we probably felt about writing a book as they do their own finances, and showing that, 2 hours, and we're not advocating to spend 2 hours a week, but 2 hours every Monday, just trying to figure it out and work on this passion project, that we could produce a book within 2.5 years. And we had no idea what we were doing either, but just a little consistent behavior. And the book talks about this too. Don't get so hung up on what am I going to invest in, or I heard the markets are risky and stocks, you're going to lose your money. We talk about those issues in there, but eliminate the excuses. Get rid of the buts in your life, but this, but that. Get started. And then they start to see that snowball rolling and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It creates motivation, it creates energy, and creates passion to continue to work towards their game plan.
Yeah, I think you probably hit it right in the head with getting started is the hardest thing to do. But once you do get started, you build momentum, you have small wins, and they kind of snowball into bigger success. You mentioned mindset. It's really important. Kind of what I mentioned earlier, if someone's habits are ingrained and they're not necessarily the best habits, how can someone go from that, all right, money comes in, I'm not treating that as a business, I'm not treating that as a receivable, I'm just going to, if my bank account says $1,000, I know I have $1,000 to spend. How do you go from that to getting on a path towards financial freedom or towards doing the right things with their finances?
We have really focused on trying to get somebody early in the process, because obviously that's critical in this. If they start off with, they're not used to spending a certain way and living paycheck to paycheck, it's a lot easier to set those habits. One of the things we've just talked about, that if it's a little bit, it's been a few years and you're kind of set in your ways, and maybe 20% isn't the number that you can do, just start with something. Exactly what both of you guys are saying. Start at 5%. Take advantage of 5% from you and a match from your employer at 5%. And then we've seen those firsthand, where all of a sudden the money is just sort of going into this account. They don't really realize that it's gone, because they're not having to physically do anything to move money or anything like that. And the more you can just automate it is the easy wins that you can get, where they don't feel it's painful. And then the next thing you know, maybe 5% goes to 7% or 7% goes to 10%. And so just little steps like that, working your way toward 20%, we talk about in our presentations that we do all the time. The 20% is not hard and fast. If you can do it, that's awesome. And again, 20% is, as you guys know, is everything considered. So 401k matches, or if you have an HSA, and a lot of employers will put money in your HSA, that can come out of the 20%. And so that's the goal. But some people it's going to start at 5. Some people it's going to start at 10, and just sort of working your way and seeing those little victories that happen, and that it's not that painful. And then they see the momentum, then they get the momentum that happens from that, from seeing these little victories just by taking these small steps.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, that's all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you both for joining me on an episode of The Agent of Wealth. It was great speaking to you. Before we close, where can our listeners go to learn more about the book or get a copy of it?
We'd love to have them go to simpleroadbook.com, which is our website. It's got a lot of information that is helpful, money guides and FAQs and some of the videos and things like that. So that's usually the first stop. And then from there, we've got Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We'd love to have people follow us on those platforms as well. And again, you just get these bite-sized little videos that can hopefully help in terms of just little topics. We were talking earlier about car payments and stuff like that, and we have a chapter in our book about it's only $400 a month. We talk about that for the marketing mindset of that, and hopefully some good pieces of advice there on our social media channels.
Great. We'll include all those links in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Steve and Mark, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow The Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.